Well, hello everybody, and today we're going to start our second unit. Okay, so we took care of the pre-Columbian stuff. So we looked at 1491 to 1607. 1491 is before Columbus discovers the Americas. 1607 is going to be a very important date. It's super duper important for U.S. history. 1607, write this down, is the settlement of Jamestown. Jamestown is the first permanent British settlement in the Americas. Again, Jamestown is the first permanent British settlement in the Americas. Okay? Remember those dates that I told you between the time periods that you need to know. 1607 is going to be one of those extremely important dates. This time period, the colonial period, when the British colonies are getting up and running, we're going to look at in between 1607, which is the founding of Jamestown again, and 1754. 1754 is going to be the start of the French and Indian War, or in Europe it's going to be known as the 7 Years' War. And it's going to be the aftermath of that war that is going to lead the British colonies to gain their independence. So that's where we're going. This unit, we're going to take a look all at the British colonies, and we're going to try to understand how that's going to happen. Okay, so we're going to take a look at what forces are leading the British to settling in the New World and how we can understand the differences between those different colonies. So first we're going to basically take a look at the colonies in chunks. We're going to take a look at the North, the South, and the Middle. We're going to start in the South because that's where settlement first happened, specifically in Virginia. So our focus question today is, how was early British colonial settlement similar to and different from Spanish settlement? So this is going to be a comparison question, of course, right? Very simple. All right, British colonial settlement and Spanish settlements. Now, we started talking a little bit about this in class. Spanish settlements, we know, are going to be Central and South America. And knowing what we already know, there's going to be a very different dynamic that's going to play in the Spanish colonies versus the British colonies. The British colonies primarily being the United States and later Canada, or parts of Canada. So we think first and foremost about the racial disparity. Okay? Central and South America, you have mixed populations. That's going to be because the Spanish are going to rely on just a very few overlords that basically are going to do the work, and they're going to rely on forced labor systems in order to take care of everything else. The Spanish do not bring a lot of women over. Instead, the Spanish that come over are going to intermarry with the local populations, which is how we get the very mixed Spanish populations that we have today, the Hispanics. You've got white mixed with Indian, white mixed with African, African mixed with Native, Native mixed with everything else, and that's why Hispanics are, such a very mixed population. There was a lot of intermixing of the different populations going on, with slaves coming from Africa, the Hispanics, the Native American Indians that had survived, and the whites coming over. In British colonies, there's going to be a different kind of settlement. The British are going to segregate themselves. They're going to bring over, a lot of times, entire families, and they're going to kind of propagate that segregated society, which is why you have white, black, native, and the intermixing in what was the British colonies is not going to be to as great of extent as it was in the Spanish colonies. But as we're going to see, at first that's going to be a little different, because at first there's going to be a lot of similarities. So let's dive right in and talk about why England is coming over. All right. So England is going to be a little late to the game. We got to go back to European power politics that we started to talk about. In the 15th century, Spain was very powerful. It was probably the most powerful of the European powers. Ferdinand and Isabella, they had unified the empire, and then after that, their son Philip II is going to forge an alliance with the Habsburgs, who had the Holy Roman Empire and also controlled Austria. and they're going to have a son. And Philip's going to have a son. That son's going to be Charles V. Charles V is going to have a huge empire that's going to be most of continental Europe. Big, big power. Now, England, by contrast, was not as big. So it makes sense that Spain's going to get out there in the 15th century because Spain is big, Spain's got the power, Spain's got the resources, and as they got more gold and silver flowing in from the Americas, that's going to make them even more powerful. Well, in England was having some issues, and they had issues over the split with the Catholic Church. This is also the time of the Protestant Reformation. King Henry VIII. Okay, this is the guy that had 6 wives, and a lot of them ended up dying because none of them could give him a son. So King Henry VIII, in a spat with the Pope, because he wanted a divorce, because he wanted a wife that would give him a son, and his wife wasn't giving him a son, ended up breaking the Church of England away from the Catholic Church and created the Anglican Church, and that happened in 1536. So there's an intense rivalry with England and the Catholic countries at that time. Spain was one of them, and Ireland, which shares a border with England, also had issues. There's going to be issues with the Pope, so there's going to be a lot of defense. Well, King Henry's going to die. He had a son. His son died because his son was very sick. One of his daughters took over. She wasn't very well liked, and she was killed. And then another daughter, Elizabeth, takes over. Elizabeth I of England, who's probably one of the best monarchs England ever had. And one of the things that Elizabeth did, she understood the way things were. And in the 16th century, in the early 16th century, it was very, very much a man's world. And Elizabeth was ruling a major European power at a time when it was a man's world. So there were a lot of men out there that were looking to marry her. Princes, kings, and why were they looking to marry her? Because if they married her, then they would be able to merge their lands with England's and they would become more powerful. Elizabeth, of course, would not have the power because she would marry it off. But Elizabeth wasn't about to go out and say, well, I'm not going to marry anybody. Instead, she was saying, okay, well, what can you do for England? What can you do for me? So all of these suitors came over to England and tried to woo Elizabeth. And the Swiss taught them how to build clocks, and Elizabeth was like, "Oh, that's nice. Thank you for the clock," and that's how we got Big Ben. Basically, all the different. She was basically playing guys. Come over, teach us what you can do. And one of the things the Spanish taught her to do, because Philip II was the king of Spain, and Philip II wanted to be even more powerful than he was, so he's trying to court Elizabeth, and Elizabeth goes, so, Spanish, you guys are pretty good at building ships. Why don't you teach us how to build ships? So Phil was like, okay, we'll teach you how to build ships. So they taught England how to build ships. And Elizabeth's like, oh, thank you, but I'm not interested. Now, Philip was not about to have it. He was kind of feeling some type of way right now because, hey, they went over, they taught Elizabeth how to build ships, and now, she doesn't want anything to do with them? Are you kidding me? So Philip is going to send his armada. He's going to send a fleet of ships to England, and he wants to pound them back into the dirt. He's going to teach Elizabeth for dubbing him. So there's going to be a battle with the Spanish Armada. Now, at that time, basically, Spain sends this huge fleet. A storm comes up and pretty much wipes out the fleet. And then the English Navy was able to defeat what was left of the Spanish Navy in 1588. That basically made England the predominant naval power instead of Spain. So this is going to be the pretext for England going out and sailing the world. They were able to defeat Spain, thereby becoming the most powerful naval power. Now, at the same time that's happening, there is going to be an issue with population growth in Europe and in England in particular. All right, we have to remember when we talked about the Columbian Exchange. All of those new crops are going to Europe for the first time. The potato, corn, sweet potatoes. And those things are going to be easy to grow, and they're going to, basically improve the diet of Europeans. Now, throughout history, when diet improves, when people have more opportunity to have food, we have more babies. It's true as now as it was back then. The more people can eat, the more babies they have. So they were having lots and lots of babies in Europe. And the population puts a strain on the resources. So basically, there's more people competing for jobs. There's not as much to go around. People are eating, but people are kind of miserable. So there's going to be a need to take these people and put them somewhere where they can be useful. And one of those things is, in one of those places is going to be the Americas. Got to remember, what was the effect of the Columbian Exchange on the Americas, conveniently? If it increases the population in Europe, the diseases decrease the population in America. So what we're going to end up having is we're going to have a population imbalance where Europe is going to have too many people and the Americas are going to have too little people. That's going to lead to the intense migration and going overseas. Now, going in with that, you have the practice of primogeniture, which was increasing in Europe. Primogeniture, prima means first, firstborn son. So, in Europe at this time, it was becoming practice when somebody died, say a lord or somebody that had some property died, they would leave everything to their firstborn son. Now, this is good in terms of you're keeping all of the holdings, you're keeping the wealth together and within the family. But what's gonna be bad about that is you're gonna have a lot of people that are gonna be educated because they're children of nobility, but they're not going to have the options, they're not going to have the wealth that they would want to have, and they're going to be ambitious. So the Americas is seen as a natural release valve. It's a place where the extra people can go, and it's a place where the second sons of the wealthy Europeans can go and kind of make a fortune and make a name for themselves. It's a fresh start. It's a way to basically change things up and go out and have a better life for yourself. So that's going to be the forces that's going to lead England to want to go out. Okay? There is going to be some of that, wealth and power seeking, but really you have these population forces that are also going to play a role that weren't there with the Spanish. All right, joint stock companies. Joint stock companies are going to be the mechanism or the means of settlement. England was going through the commercial revolution. England was becoming a capitalistic nation. Okay, Spain is very much a mercantilistic nation. Mercantilism is the economic system where basically colonies exist to make money for the mother countries. Okay? Capitalism is where we use the resources and invest in capital in order to meet supply and demand. And supply and demand, people will be basically making money by, supplying and demand and making profit off of that. It's the type of economic system that we have today. That was beginning at this time. So a joint stock company is just that. It's a company where people would buy stock in. They would pool their capital, their money, and buy stock or pieces of a company. That allowed the company to have enough money to engage in a bigger enterprise than an ordinary individual would, because you have more than one person that's joining together into this. And with their stock, they share in the company, they share the risk, they share all the risk, and they share the rewards. So if the company goes down, they don't lose everything themselves. They only lose what they have in it. If the company rises, then they rise in according to the share with the company. It's a stock company. So the joint stock companies are going to be used to establish colonies in the New World. You're going to have a bunch of investors that come together and buy stock in this colony. And their objective is for that colony to succeed and make them money. And then they will grow. Now, there's going to be an earlier colony called Roanoke that's going to start in the 16th century, but it was a disastrous failure. In fact, they just found it not too long ago because they didn't even know where it was. In 1607 is going to be the big year, because that's going to be the first year when the British are actually going to set up a permanent colony. And that permanent colony is going to be Jamestown. Jamestown is in Virginia, okay? And it is going to be a joint stock company. It's going to be established to set up a colony in the New World to search for gold. Does that sound familiar? It should. Okay? Now, basically, people going over first are going to be just like the Spanish. They're going out looking for gold. And if they didn't find gold, if they didn't strike a wish, they were threatened with abandonment in the wilderness. How nice. Okay? The stock company guaranteed settlers the same rights as they had in England. This is important. So if you're going out there, you are still considered British citizens. And English law, everything that was set up in England would stretch across the Atlantic. You're still English citizens, and you're still bound by British law. That's going to be important, especially when we get in talking about the Revolution. All right. So, what are some problems? What could happen if you just send people over in order to search for gold and find it? Well, one of them is you're going to piss off the people that are there, like the Powhatan Indians. And the settlers are going to basically go over and they're going to start looking for gold. Where do they look? They start by going and beating up the Indians. The Indians don't like that. There's very few colonists at first, only 100 of them, and the natives aren't about to do that. They've heard stories secondhand of the White Devils and what they've done to this and what they've done in South America, so they're not about to have that. They fight. Out of the first 100 colonists, 40 died in the first year. Some of them from Indian attacks, and some died according to exposure. Now, the land is going to be very rich with resources, some excellent farmland. So these people that went over there, these colonists, could have very well made plenty of money. But they're not making plenty of money. Why not? Guess what they're doing instead of farming that land and trying to make something out of it? They're looking for gold. And because they're spending all of their time looking for gold instead of actually trying to establish a living and survive, they're not going to have any food, so they're going to die. Okay? Enter this guy, John Smith. Yes, this is the John Smith from Pocahontas. No, he did not actually marry Pocahontas. We're going to get to that. Okay. John Smith is going to take over the colony in 1608. Basically, Jamestown is going the way of Roanoke. It's about to no longer exist. The people are dying. They're not exactly too keen on survival. So John Smith is going to come in, and he is going to put things together. And he's like, okay, all of you wealth hunters and soldiers of fortune, you want to be Spanish conquistadors who can't eat, we're going to change things up. Okay, number one, you don't work, you don't eat. You want to go out all day and spend time looking for gold? Be my guest. You're not getting any food from us. Okay? So that was the first thing he did. He set to whip up the colony in shape so that it could be self-sufficient. So that these people could take care of themselves and not die. Kind of important. Now, the Powhatan Indians also want to basically make a show. So they see this new guy that's in charge and they kidnap him. Okay? And they wanted, there was a language barrier, of course. So with the natives, it was a very ritualistic thing. So they wanted to do a ritual execution with him. It's not a real execution. They wanted to show him that they were powerful enough that if they wanted to, they could chop his head off. But they go through this ritual. At the last second, the daughter of the chief, Pocahontas, is going to intervene and stop. This was all planned. It was all ritual. There was no love story. You know, John Smith is going to be much older than Pocahontas. Pocahontas is going to be a young girl. And it's all a show. And it's to send out the message that we are powerful. Don't mess with us. We could get you. Now, John Smith kind of got that idea. He's like, okay. So he worked to try to get his colonists farming. But a lot of them didn't take it seriously. And their colony is still going to struggle. All right? Out of 400 settlers that had arrived by 1610, only 60 survived. 340 had died. So the people are going to basically want some change. In 1610, Despite all of John Smith's best efforts, a new guy is going to come to power, and that's going to be Lord de War. Okay, and he's going to take over in 1610, and he's going to be like, okay, we got to survive, and we're having trouble. We're very good farmers. We're better at fighters because we came over here to be like conquistadors. So let's be conquistadors. So they use what is called Irish tactics because this is what the British did to the Irish. Yes. And basically, the English are going to raid native settlements and steal food from the Native Americans. Native Americans, of course, are going to be pissed about this, and that's going to lead to the First Anglo-Powhatan War in 1614. All right? Now, this war is going to go back and forth for a little while, and is finally going to end with a symbolic marriage of the two peoples, where Pocahontas, who is the daughter of the chief, is going to marry John Rolfe, who is going to be a prominent Jamestown member and later is going to be one of the leaders of the colony. All right, the peace is going to last for 8 years, but the whites are going to come and become ever more plentiful, and as more and more people come, they're going to start taking more land, and they're going to start taking more native land. This is going to be the story all throughout American history, especially the early part of American history. Okay, white people come, white people take land. Pisses off natives, go to war. White people are going to take more land, pisses off natives, go to more war. But every time, the whites are going to get stronger and stronger, and will become Americans are going to get stronger and stronger, and natives, because they're dealing with a technological imbalance, and because they're dealing with disease, are going to get pushed back. Okay? So, in 1622, there's another war. The Virginia Company called for a perpetual war without truce. And that war is going to last for a while. By 1685, the Powhatan Indians were essentially extinct. Take that in for a second. The thirst for land and riches led to an almost all-out extinction of this one tribe. And the English, as they came in, they wanted more land, and they took it. They took it, and they took it. And what were they doing with this land? Well, you got to remember, we're in the South. In the economy in the South, the land in the South is going to be very rich and it's going to be very fertile. And they're going to be growing an Indian crop on it that had taken on and had really caught on with the fashionable houses in Europe. And it was something that the wealthy in Europe were doing a lot, and it was creating quite a demand. Tobacco. Okay? John Rolfe became the father of the tobacco industry. And by 1612, the raising of tobacco had been perfected, and there was a huge demand in Europe. You got to remember, this is an addictive substance, and it's an addictive substance with a limited supply back then. It's something that if you did it, it showed how wealthy you were. It was a fashion symbol, and it was a fashion symbol that also created an addiction. Tobacco fever is going to spread throughout Virginia. Why do the English moving in there need more native land? Because they need to grow more native tobacco so they can bring it back to Europe and they can sell it. Now, coming over, they're also going to need a labor supply. And just like the problems in South America, if first the Spanish tried to use Native Americans with the encomienda system, but Native Americans were dying out due to diseases and they wouldn't be subjugated very easily. So the first slaves are going to be imported by 1619. That's just 12 years after the founding of Jamestown. So we have the economic side of it, but everything's not all horrible. Remember how we talked about when the Virginia Company said that English law would follow British people across the water in the Atlantic into the Americas? Well, that did continue, and we're going to start to see the development of democracy in the colonies. And we're going to see it in a couple of places. This is a Regents question. It's always all over the place. And one of the places we're going to see it is what's called the Virginia House of Burgesses. In 1619, which is, yes, the same year the slaves are brought in to Jamestown for the first time. We have the original sin of slavery beginning. We also see government becoming more democratic. The British East India Company, based in London, is going to authorize settlers to summon an assembly known as the House of Burgesses, basically a House of Representatives. It was only made up of landowners and planters at first who controlled tracts of land, but these guys are going to share in the decision making for the colony. Most people are only workers, they don't own land, so they have no say. But I have to say this again. For the first time in the Americas, we start to see the beginning of collective rule. At first, it's only wealthy people who own land, but decision making is being shared, and there is somewhat of a democratic voice. It is not simply, this is the way it is because I said so. And that democratic spirit is going to continue to develop. So, there we have the first British colony, Jamestown. Was it, all perfect and all fun and games? Absolutely not. People are going to die. A Native American tribe is going to be almost wiped out. Slaves are going to be imported, all for that wealth and lust for power. The power is going to be a different form. We're looking power and wealth in terms of tobacco instead of terms of, searching out for gold. But still, we have that. But we do have the silver lining where we start to see the beginning of democracy develop. Okay, that's the end of this section. Remember, the focus question is, how was early British colonial settlement similar to and different from Spanish colonial settlement? And that will be due tomorrow. All right, people, thank you very much, and have a great day.